right, welcome to, we're going to go ahead and get started now. Welcome to the Delta Stewardship Council monthly meeting. We are here in West Sacramento, and the date is Thursday, February 27th, and the time is 9:35 a.m. I just want to mention for people that are visiting here today, the restrooms are located through the doors and to the right down the hallway. And we do have one agenda item change. We're going to not be having a closed session today, so agenda item number 10 will be skipped. All right, and I will turn it over to Emma in accordance with our Bagley-Keene requirements to conduct a roll call of the council members to establish a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before I take roll call, I want to note that Councilmember Weso and Councilmember Damrell will be joining us later. Councilmember Burgess.
Here.
Councilmember Maranian.
Here.
Councilmember Zingali.
Here.
Chair Lee.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Our fourth agenda item is our public comment. This item is for the public to comment on any topics not on the council's agenda. Any comments on items on the agenda need to be taken during that agenda item. Emma, do we have any public comments for items not on today's agenda?
We do not have any public comment in Sacramento. Councilmember Zingali, is there any public comment in Eureka?
No public comment here at this time.
No public comment.
Perfect. And we do have our two members coming in, so we'll just wait for a moment. Member Hueso and Member Damrell have arrived. Yeah, there was some traffic issues this morning. Good morning. Good morning. There we go. We are on agenda item number 5, our consent calendar. We have one item on the consent calendar, which is the adoption of the January 23rd, 2025 meeting summary. Before we vote, are there any public comments on the items on the consent calendar?
There are no public comments here. Councilmember Zingali, do you have any public comment?
No public comment here.
No public comment.
Thank you. I'll entertain a motion to approve these items.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All right. I have a motion from Councilmember Burgess and a second from Councilmember Hueso. Emma will proceed with the roll call vote.
Councilmember Burgess.
Aye.
Burgess, aye. Councilmember Damrell. Damrell, aye. Councilmember Weso.
Aye.
Weso, aye. Councilmember Maranian.
I will abstain. I was not in the meeting. I would not vote on the
Sounds
minutes.
good.
Yeah.
Maranian abstains. Councilmember Zingali.
Aye.
Zingali, aye. Chair Lee.
Aye.
Lee, aye. Motion passes.
Thank you, Emma. Agenda item 6 is the chair's report. We have had a busy week and another busy week next week coming up. We're starting our meet and greets with some of the members of the legislature. So this week we met with Senator Lamone and Senator McNerney to talk about the role of the council and to make sure they thoroughly understand our appeals process. They were both great meetings, and we look forward to working with them in the future. Yesterday, I also attended the National Heritage Area Advisory Committee meeting, where we learned that the National Park Service has approved the management plan, which means that the funding for the heritage area is expected to increase pending congressional appropriation from the Heritage Partnership Program. And I'll turn it over to Councilmember Burgess to talk a little bit more about that.
Thank you. Yeah, because it's a federally funded program, there is some concerns related to whether that funding will continue. And the expansion of the funding is based on new NHAs coming on board that would qualify for the higher funding. So I was in Washington, D.C. a couple weeks ago with the NHA organizations there's a lot of concern related to the topics of cultural and diversity and those kind of things. But there's an emphasis that's always been there, and that was the economic development opportunities related to this, and the fact that there's often a lot of leverage that comes with that money, some as high as 5-to-1. So that's what we'll be focusing on. And so that's the NHA updates.
Awesome, thank you. We also heard from a speaker from the Discover the Delta Foundation, and they're working on raising funds to build an education center at the corner of Highway 12 and 160, was it? Yeah. Which sounds like it will be a great opportunity for some collaboration with the National Heritage Area. So that was very, very interesting as well. Do any other members have any updates they want to have while I? Sure, yeah. Why don't you do that?
I'll just say this week, the Delta Protection Commission met, and we have appointed an interim director, Dan Ray, who has a history with the Delta Protection Commission and a longer history with the Delta Stewardship Council. And we're very excited about his temporary leadership, and we will be doing a recruitment for a new executive director soon.
Awesome, thank you. Any other members have any updates they want to give or anything? Nope. All right, I'll turn to Emma for public comment.
No public comment here. Councilmember Zingali, is there public comment for you?
No, none here.
No public comment.
Thanks, Emma. All right, I'll turn it over to Jessica Pearson for our executive officer's report.
Thank you very much, Chair Lee. Good morning. Welcome to West Sacramento. Big thank you to the VFW for hosting our meeting this month. We're happy to be here. I did want to mention briefly some of the federal impacts that we're beginning to see as it pertains to Delta management and Delta science. The new federal administration and news regarding early actions to downsize the federal government have certainly dominated the news cycle. But in particular, we are beginning to see impacts to the work and the workers from the federal side in this region. The council itself has limited federal funding, so fortunately our exposure to direct funding cuts is low. However, we do depend on our state and federal partners to implement the Delta plan, as well as to collaborate on Delta science and to fund or to do Delta science, like perform fish sampling, experimental research on species like Delta smelt and others. We depend on the monitoring and the management work performed by federal regional agency staff, and they are not exempt from these federal staffing cuts. We're aware that some of our federal partner offices working on Delta issues have already been asked to lay off 20% of their staff. Those layoffs have already occurred this month. And news of federal Delta-related contracts and programs being canceled or downscaled continue to trickle in almost on a daily basis. So I'll continue to report out on the impacts as we learn about them. In the immediate term, we expect it will be more challenging to collaborate with our federal agency partners as their time and funding and capacity is reduced. I don't have any updates on covered action certifications, as no new certifications have been filed since our last meeting. We do have a very brief legal update and a legislative update. So first I'm going to turn to Jorge Aguilar.
So we do have a legal update. The legal update is that yesterday afternoon, the council was served with a lawsuit. It's a lawsuit filed by the County of Sacramento, Sacramento County Water Agency, City of Stockton, Sacramento Area Sewer District, Central Delta Water Agency, and the County of San Joaquin. And that's in Sacramento County Superior Court, case number 25 WM 00030. We're in the process of reviewing the lawsuit and evaluating the claims.
Thank you, Jorge. More to come on that. Now I'd like to invite up Brandon Chapin and Audrey Cho to perform our legislative update.
Thank you, Jessica, and good morning, Chair and members. So as you can imagine, as Chair Lee alluded to, it's been a busy couple of weeks. The last week between the meet and greets that we've been doing, and then last week the legislature had its bill introduction deadline. About a little more than 2,500 bills were introduced, and that's even more than has been in the past, even though they've limited the amount of bills that they can introduce from 50 to 35. So the hope is that next year there will be less bills because they're really close already to their 35 bill limit. I will mention that we have Audrey and I have a few bills that we'll be introducing today to let you all know about, but there are quite a few of what are called spot bills. These are just bills to get something in before the deadline. They don't really have anything substantive in them, but they will within 30 days. And so we'll both be monitoring those and we'll report back on anything of interest, which I expect that there will be in March. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Just a few to introduce to you all. First is AB 362 from Assemblymember Ramos. This has to do with the Water Board's Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan and also its basin plans. And this would, excuse me, and this would require the board to consider California tribal communities and tribal beneficial uses in the context of both of those plans. So this one will be monitored and will be reported back on as it goes forward. Next is AB 900. This is from Assemblymember Pappen. Oh, back to the next slide, please. There we go. This has to do with the state and California Natural Resources Agency 30 by 30 goals to preserve 30,000 acres of land by 2030. Right now, there's a report that usually is produced on this pathways to 30 by 30, but this bill would also require that report to outline recommendations for increasing science-based management and stewardship of these 30 by 30 lands, as well as a bunch of different requirements that will need to be in that report of how they assess science-based management, use the best available science, and things along those lines, including innovative ways to reduce barriers to increase federal, state, and local support for science-based management and stewardship. So another one that we'll be continually updating you all is especially with the connection to the Delta Science Program. Next is SB 72. This one is going to be familiar to you all. I reported on it quite a bit last year as a different bill. This is from Senator Caballero regarding the California Water Plan. And this would be amending the process and what's in the California Water Plan to ensure that it has specified targets for water supply during the year, and also a process for having a public committee that would help to review and assess the plan as it's developed. And this would be for the 2033 update to the plan. I do want to emphasize the water plan is not a regulatory document. It is more of a guiding document for the state for water planning. And we'll continue to update on that. I will mention that this was, as I mentioned, a bill last year. It was vetoed by Governor Newsom for cost. The last one that I'll introduce on, and then I'll pass it over to Audrey, is SB 224. This is by Senator Hurtado relating to water supply forecasting for the Department of Water Resources. This would require the department by 2027 to adopt new water supply forecasting models and procedures that better address the effects of climate change, and then to regularly report back to the legislature and the public on how those forecasting and modeling is doing and how accurate it is. So again, another one that I'll continue to update you on as it proceeds. This has been a topic that's been at the legislature for quite some time. There was an audit, I believe, a couple of years ago from the State Legislative Audit Committee about the Department of Water Resources water supply forecasting. So I'll now pass it over to Audrey.
Great, thank you, Brandon. Next slide, please. So moving on to SB 639 by Senator Ashby. Current law states that cities and counties are in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Valley must follow the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan. And in doing so, they're prohibited from developing in a flood hazard zone unless they make a specified finding. One example of a specified finding is if the city or county's flood agency has made progress on flood protection equal to or greater than the urban level of flood protection standard for areas that are protected by project levies. And so this bill would extend from 2025 to 2030 the deadline for a few areas in the city and county of Sacramento, including portions of the Natomas Basin and the Beach Lake sub-area, to meet that urban level of flood protection. Next slide, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just one thing I'll add, you'll remember a similar bill last year that extended the deadline for Mossdale Tract outside of Stockton in San Joaquin County. That's very similar to this bill.
Great, thank you, Brandon. Moving on to SB 697 by Senator Laird. Currently, the State Water Resources Control Board is authorized to determine water rights within a stream system and also adjudicate those water rights. And there are certain requirements for that adjudication, including things like a field investigation, hearings, and notice of those hearing processes. And this bill would revise these water rights adjudication requirements. Some of these revisions would require the board to investigate and detail the use of water, but remove the requirement to do a full field investigation. Also, this bill would allow the board to issue an informative order requiring submission of monthly reports of water usage from a water rights claimant within 45 days of the order. Next slide, please. And then last but not least, we have SB 795 by Senator Richardson. And similar to a bill that Brandon already spoke about, this one concerns the 30 by 30 goal from the California Natural Resources Agency, which is a goal of conserving at least 30% of coastal lands, of land and coastal waters by 2030. And the Secretary of Natural Resources is required to report annually on this goal. And this bill would require all state agencies, including their boards and commissions and conservancies, to consider and ensure consistency with the 30 by 30 goal when adopting or revising plans, policies, or regulations. And that's it.
Yeah.
Through the chair. Do we already do that? Do we already consider those 30 by 30 in the plans that we're already doing?
I would say general, yes. I'd have to defer to staff, but we are active in 30 by 30 efforts.
Okay.
Yes.
It seems to me, and when I'm watching, everybody kind of includes that in what we're working on. So, okay, thank you.
Maybe the difference is the bill makes it a requirement for all state agencies, and right now that's probably just by policy. Right. That's an educated guess.
Yeah.
Right.
May I ask you a question?
Yes, go
Yes.
ahead, Maria.
On AB 900, where we talk about the lands, and I understand the water, but the lands, is that a new or it was existing? The whole idea of when it says at least 30% of the state's lands and coastal waters, that was an extension of, I mean, was it there before or?
Yeah, it's a policy of the state. I believe it was established by executive order by Governor Newsom a couple of years ago, but I'd have to get back to you on when it officially became a policy of the state. But it is something that the state and the California Natural Resources Agency has been working towards for the past 2 years.
I see. And then one more on SB 697. Are there caps? Is this constitute some kind of new caps on usage of the water right owners? I mean, we're monitoring how much they each use, but is it also putting a cap on it?
I don't believe so. And Audrey, correct me if I'm wrong. I believe it's just a process for evaluating and establishing more of a process
I
for
see.
evaluating the water rate and the usage.
Yeah, my understanding is that it just removes the requirement to always do a full field investigation, and then also allows the board to submit an order and then receive back information from the
So
claimant.
Just
So-
monitoring.
Yeah, and it also puts the burden of proof kind of on the claimant to then bring it back to the board.
Thank you.
And I can follow up with more information on 30 by 30 for you, Councilmember
Yeah.
Ryan. Yeah.
Just interested. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank
Thank
you
you.
both so much. Now I'm going to turn to comment letters. We do have 2 comment letters in your packet from this month. On February 10th, council staff sent a letter to state parks regarding their notice of preparation for an environmental impact report for the Delta Meadows Park classification and general plan project. This project will result in a general plan for the Delta Meadows property, which is located near Walnut Grove and Locke. Additionally, the property would be classified into either a state recreation area, state park, state historic park, or state reserve. These classifications come with varying levels of trail systems, interpretive activities, recreation, or even overnight lodging. So areas within Delta Meadows could also be identified as a natural preserve or a cultural preserve. In our Delta Plan, we have a recommendation on this topic. It's Delta Plan Recommendation 13, which calls for state parks to add or improve recreation facilities in the Delta, including completing the planning and park at Delta Meadows. Council staff is actively tracking the project and coordinating with state park staff regarding the council's covered action process. And this project will also be a focus of our upcoming April 3rd Delta Plan Interagency Committee meeting and tour. So please join us for that if you're able. A letter dated February 14th was sent by council staff to the Metropolitan Transportation Commission and Association of Bay Area Governments regarding their notice of preparation of an environmental impact report for Plan Bay Area 2050 plus. This is a regional transportation plan and sustainable community strategy under the law. The letter summarizes requirements of the Delta Reform Act pertaining to Plan Bay Area 2050 and provides council's comments on the notice of preparation regarding the scope and the content of their environmental impact report. Council staff invites their staff to engage with us to ensure consistency between Plan Bay Area and the Delta Plan, to ensure that the two plans are complementary in nature and serve to protect the Delta while promoting sustainable growth and economic vitality in the broader region, which is actually precisely the process that was envisioned in the Delta Reform Act in 2009 to make sure that these types of plans are consistent with the Delta Plan. I don't have any personnel announcements, just briefly on our outreach highlights. Our 2024 annual report, which was presented to you last month, earned top attention among our social media and email announcement audiences last month. So far, the story map has earned nearly 1,000 views. And so ahead for today on the agenda, we're going to hear from our Delta lead scientist, Dr. Lisa Marie Wyndham-Myers, followed by the annual update on our Delta Plan performance measures from our Planning and Performance Division. Part of their presentation is also going to include details about a new podcast that we debuted last year. The Delta Dispatch is produced by California Sea Grant State Fellow Dane Wicker in conjunction with our staff and as part of his fellowship with the council. There is a promotional audio clip of the podcast that we wanted to queue up for you. So hopefully someone in the back is ready to do that. So take a listen. This is just a teaser.
Welcome to the Delta Dispatch.
Working in water is a very fundamental thing, right? In general, it's just all of life is sustained by water.
California's Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta has a lot of moving parts.
Pictures don't really do it justice, but when you're out there and you see it, it's pretty astounding.
There's different birds out there. Wow, there's like otters and like badgers. There's like, they live there without having to go to the zoo, right? They're naturally thriving in that environment.
It's beautiful, but also very complicated.
Subsidence in the Delta is basically the sinking of the land surface.
Levees in our Delta are really critical. Without the levees, you don't have a Delta.
Enter the Delta Plan performance measures, each one tracking a unique aspect of the Delta. And this podcast patches you through to those most in the know about them.
The thing about harmful algal blooms is just how visible they are.
You know, restoration is a process to heal places that have been disrupted, right?
The Delta Dispatch starts right now.
So that was just a teaser, and I know some of you have already listened to some of the episodes. There are 3 that we've put out so far, and there are 2 forthcoming. So it's a really great new addition to our outreach and education. And with that, I conclude my executive officer's report.
Great. I just want to make a comment on that. I watched the one on the levees, and I think it's very interesting. It's educational. I mean, it does really explain complicated things in very simple language. Thank you.
Thanks for the feedback.
Got the NPR vibe. I love it. Yes, Member Burgess.
And I agree. And I think sometimes that's the hardest part, is taking something that's really complicated and helping people understand it. So these are great tools, and I plan to share this with my outreach materials.
Daniel has his hand up.
Guest member Zingali.
Yeah, I agree that Delta Dispatch podcast is really exciting. And the numbers look good. I was looking at the social media numbers with the annual report that you mentioned, Jessica. Also, I'm aware that we had to shut the social media down essentially in January because of the fires. And I was just curious if the numbers would look even better, do we think, if we'd been up in January, or can we tell if that had a major impact?
Yeah, I think in concert with other state agencies, we tried to direct social media more towards resources and announcements regarding the LA fires. So we were essentially kind of quiet on social media for the first part of that month. So yes, that definitely did impact our numbers.
I think that was the right thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm going to pile on to your report with one personnel mention that I should have done during my chair's report, which is that Diane Burgess was sworn in this morning as for her second term. She was reelected for the chair of the Delta Protection Commission for her second term. And so that is her position here on the council. So I just want to give a round of applause to Diane for being here with us again. So great. We appreciate all the knowledge and wealth of information that you bring to the council, Diane. So thanks for being here. Are there any public comments on this item?
No public comments in West Sacramento. Councilmember Zingali.
No public comments here.
No public comment.
All right, thank you. We will turn to agenda item number 8, which is our lead scientist report with Dr. Lisa Marie Wyndham Myers.
Okay, thank you, Chair Lee. It's good to see everyone here in this room, and I appreciate the new venue. I have a couple of visuals for today that I think will be helpful, particularly for the big word and the big article that I'm highlighting this month. When you see this, you'll see that the term hydrogeodesy is used, and I think that people go, it's just, this sounds very confusing, but really ultimately we're just talking about measuring water by measuring its shape and measuring how it's moving through the system. We've had a really dry January, and suddenly we had all these atmospheric rivers, and I'm sure you all experienced them, but tracking where that water actually goes is complicated. And I think you've probably seen some mixed reports on where things are moving. And that's why this tool is useful for us to really understand where the water's going. And at this, I'm going to highlight also the American Geophysical Union conference that I went to in Washington, DC, where I know that Diane has also been recently. But at that conference, and also through reading the news in the Maven's notebook, I was struck by the importance of understanding how we know what we know. And I wish I was talking about performance measures, but instead I am talking about hydrogeodesy. But it's really important that we understand what, the data behind how we're making, how we are understanding where water is moving. And we tend to think we're tracking with just a series of gauges, handful of gauges in channels and groundwater wells and snowpack measurements. And if you go to the California Water Watch site, you can see all that stuff live, all these gauges reporting. For example, it has 8,000 wells across the state reporting, but that's like one well for every 20 square miles. That's like having 5 wells in Sacramento. It's not a lot. And you need something to fill in the space. And that's where remote sensing comes in. What I want to highlight here is when we think about remote sensing, as we did this before, when we talked about satellite products, we think about what you can see from the sky, like eyes in the sky, the greenness of the vegetation, or whether you have urban or agricultural lands or these types of things. But physical remote sensing is like a superpower. It's this ability to actually look at ground movement, water movement, and the shapes of things on the ground. And that's really, it sounds complicated, but it's not. And I want to just highlight in this graphic why these are all things that you actually understand already. So the terms altimetry, that's just measuring water surface level, basically with radar, with sending radio waves down, measuring how long it takes for that signal to come back. It's just the height of things. We've been doing this since 1978. It's fundamental to looking at water heights, ocean heights. You might have heard of something called CSAT or IceSat. That's how we measure glaciers in the ocean. INSAR, which is synthetic aperture radar, and the IN is interferometry. That's basically mean the difference between 2 points or 2 timestamps to see change in elevations. And this is something that we really need to use more frequently in the Delta in particular, but also just across the state to track where water's moving. Gravimetry is basically an orbiting satellite called GRACE. You might have heard of this. It's how we know how much water is underground, because most of the water that's falling, we can't see it. It's not in the channels. It's not in the lakes. It's not visual. And so it's with gravimetry, you can see the satellite gets warped in its orbit by the gravity in a particular spot. And you can basically see how gravity has changed, because water always weighs the exact same amount. Water weighs a kilogram per liter. It's just exactly the same. So by looking at that mass change, you can see where it is on Tuesday, and then on Wednesday, where did it move? And then on Thursday, where did it move? So you can actually track how water's moving underground. That's why it's so important. It's used a lot. And then GNSS is the Global Navigation Satellite System. We all use this. This is GPS. This is self-driving cars. This is basically just tracking land motion, but you can see when water goes into a soil, it will respond, or might go into an elastic aquifer, and then the aquifer will rise. And sometimes the aquifer doesn't rise, and that's inelastic. And that tells us something about the capability of that aquifer to actually store more water. So all of these tools are out there, they're being used. And the cool thing about them is, when we talk about the efficiency of the science program, these satellites are paid for with your tax dollars. I mean, they're up there, they're validated, it's super high quality data, and it's publicly available. And it needs to be better used in our system with groundwater monitoring to fill in the gaps, to reduce our uncertainty in where the water is moving. And also, one thing that we're not doing very much of here, and they highlight in the paper the utility of this, is changes through time. So you can see the responses of all of those pools of water through time. So you can see you have a rapid rainfall, just because all that water came down, it doesn't necessarily get into the ground. There's a slow rate of uptake depending on where you are. Some places is fast, gravelly places, and those are important. But the point in saying this is that if you start using these data through time in a modeling framework, we can understand social responses, like how are our withdrawals of water affecting those different pools, and how are they connected? Because a lot of the water is actually not groundwater, not just resources, but it's working water. It's on the landscape, it's in wetlands, it's in soils, and it's doing work. It's literally preventing wildfires. It's getting cleaned and or supporting ecosystem services in wetlands. So there's a lot of tools that we're really not making the best use of right now. And I think the highlight in this paper is, a summary of 3,000 different publications. Where are we making progress in water resource management, this being used, and where are we not? And so there's some very good suggestions in there. And I know that USGS has involved a lot of the research to make this used. And I know DWR, Department of Water Resources, also is interested. But by shining a light on these tools, I want to make sure that we understand it's not voodoo and magic, and we don't understand. We actually have a lot of tools at our disposal to look at responses and really make better decisions about where recharge is going to be most effective, and how vulnerable it is to removal and or long-term sequestration in like a deep aquifer setting. So that is why I wanted to highlight this. Otherwise, 50 authored huge paper. Because I think it's important that we understand that we know what we know, because there's measurements, and we need the measurements to continue in order to really track this valuable resource. That's all I was going to say on this paper. So
I have a comment. Go ahead, Member Huey, so you go first, and then Diane.
One of the issues that's concerned me the most about California's Central Valley is the issue of subsidence and how we've discussed that for years of how in many cases subsidence has even changed the flow of the rivers. So in some areas you've seen, there's a measuring, somebody has a measuring, like a pole that they installed somewhere, and they measured where that particular part of the valley used to be, and it's about 35 feet has been reduced due to the taking of groundwater for agriculture. And really the Central Valley contributes so much to California's economy in terms of agriculture growth and output, and the value of all that to our economy is enormous. But also the drawing of water. I remember I was involved in the legislature in helping to fund a restoration of the Bryant Canal that was over $100 million. We're talking about a $200 million restoration of just to restore the flow that was affected by subsidence, where now the canal was rendered completely useless. And if you consider all the canals and rivers and the flow and the speed of the flow that takes place on those rivers and how it has changed in the last 100 years. An enormous change in all the entire valley and how it drains and how it works. I normally, when I fly over the Central Valley, I look at the mountain range to see, what the snowpack looks like. I often look at the level of the lakes, which is visible from an airplane. Recently, I saw the Central Valley very flooded. I mean, it's amazing. Somebody told me that a lot of that water may not ever make it into the aquifers, because the aquifer water is water that's thousands of years old or hundreds of years old, and it took an enormous amount of flooding to affect any kind of inflow into the aquifer. And as subsidence has happened, it has made it more difficult for the water to actually go in, because you have a compacting of the soil and a compacting of the clay, which now renders any kind of absorption very, very difficult. So is our state, can this help with, I know that under the first water bond that I was very involved with, we wanted to support programs where farmers flooded their fields when there's an abundance of water, to allow that water to seep into the aquifer. And that was mainly an experimental program to see if that could help recharge the aquifers. Could this program, do you think, and this new technology help us identify good areas to charge the aquifer, or is pumping technology an option in recharging the aquifer? Is that dangerous? Could it create more harm than good? Do you know of any of that information regarding that?
Yeah, there's definitely experts within USGS in particular. I'm thinking of Claudia Font and the National Groundwater Monitoring programs that have really developed all the prioritization tools where you're really going to get the best recharge and such. But we have such a varied state. There's some things we know for sure, is that, there's a shallow aquifers. Those are the ones that we're talking about when we flood fields, it basically can go in. If you want to recharge the deep aquifers, the rain or the reflooding needs to happen in more foothills and where there's more gravelly soils, where the water can actually then drain in, because that confined deep water is often under pressure. So if you just poked a hole and tried to put water in, the water might come out. You're trying to refill it from the top, from the spigot in the top. And that's, often our rain does not fall up there. And we all, just as you can imagine, we channelize a lot of water in the state, and that we're not allowing it to recharge in the places that would be very effective. So you can identify that with just basic geology type, projections, models, but you actually can see it in this data, and I'll highlight this at AGU, there was a session on the California's big soak of 2023 and where did all the water go? And you could actually track the successful areas where the water actually made it into the groundwater and the places where it just ran off into, our channels. So it is a tool that can help prioritize successful.
So if the Owens Lake fills again, we'd
Mhm.
actually have to pump that water to somewhere where absorption is more possible.
Depends on the goal of the use of the water. So for local farmers, they probably would love to see that, their wells rise and have that shallow aquifer, because that rise and become more available for, for local uses. But if the goal is to build out, a long-term sustainable, like we lost 60 million acre feet of water from deep groundwater over the past, 40, 50 years. And it's going to take a long time to get that back in. Even with all the efforts, I think you've probably seen this, Maven's Notebook did some good coverage of this. 2017, we appear to have recharged groundwater at a scale of about 6 million acre feet. And then 2023, 6 years later, with all the efforts, it was only about 7.5 million acre feet. So it's not statewide. Yeah. So it's not, we haven't really moved the needle too much on aquifer recharge at the level that we really do need. So yeah, highlighting places where it's going to be successful would be good. But I do think that the Owens Lake flood is great for the local, that's locally available groundwater. That's not deep aquifer becoming available to a much wider area.
It could be moved through the canals.
It could. But
Member Burgess?
Going down.
So I have a new word in my vocabulary: hydrogeodesy.
I think geodesy, like
Geodesy.
like geodetic. Well,
Okay.
well, actually, you're right. Geodetic. I say geodesy.
Okay.
But that's how I've heard it.
I'll work on that. But I think we've all come to the agreement that the science needs to be dependable so that it can bring people together for better problem solving and better solutions. So my question is, who's funding these satellite systems? Is it one satellite that's doing these things? Is it multiples? Are we getting data from a couple so that it's verifiable and, that it's aligned? So that's my first question.
Sure. Yeah. If you look at this constellation of satellites up there, there's like 80 right now. They do this kind of work. They all go through such intense validation that you can actually then look at the same, data through the years. You can intercompare satellites because you actually know the numbers. It's different than, for example, if you just flew a drone and it's like, well, we have numbers, but that's not validated at the level that this is.
Okay.
So that said, there are a lot of satellites up there that are useful, and the majority are U.S. supported.
So federally funded.
Yes.
Okay. And okay. And so when we're looking at groundwater or sea level rise or subsidence, all of these tools are very helpful.
Yeah.
But when we're talking about recharging our groundwater, this is really kind of an effort that we're learning how to do as we go. Is that correct? Okay.
Yes.
So I appreciate the fact that we have multiple sources giving us this data. I was concerned we're coming from one or two, and I also am concerned about making sure that that data is preserved and protected as we learn how to do what we're doing. And so, yeah, so and it is federally funded.
Mhm.
Is there any risks to that funding at
No,
this time?
I mean, I don't know that answer to that question, but I do know that, for example, the follow-up to GRACE was launched. So the next generation of that gravimetric satellite is already up there. So as long as it just keeps continuing feeding, the hard work and expense is getting it up there, right?
Right.
Retrieving the data and then using it is, peanuts compared to that.
And the data they're collecting isn't strictly for California, it's national and
Yeah,
international probably.
Yeah, global. These are all global. Everything I just described was a global data set.
Great, thank you.
Member Singali.
Thank you. So interesting. And I appreciated the distinction you made between exciting new tools and then making good decisions based on that exciting information, because those two things don't always, as we know, go together. And specifically, I was wondering if you have any insights into the recent release of all that water by the federal government here that was controversial. I was just wondering, can you give us any sense of what the benefits were, what the consequences were, winners and losers, because there were such contradictory claims about that release.
Yeah, it's a great question. You're thinking about like the Tulare and Kern or Kiowa Basin releases.
Yes.
Yeah, I have not seen the results, but this kind of data would tell us what happened with that water. So we actually will know how many acre feet were moved. I know it's millions, I just don't remember the number. And then we can just track it again with this daily measurements of just, as these blocks of water move through, are they staying put? Are they moved into the channels? Are they, stuck in surface water still? Where is it? So the answer actually is very doable. I don't know anybody particularly right now doing that work, but I'm now really curious if we can encourage someone to take a look at the data and tell us that story.
Would it be reasonable to ask you to try to come back to us with some data on that?
It's reasonable for me to go poke around and see if anybody has results yet. So for example, USGS, Claudia Font is the person I would highlight there. She would know what the groundwater wells are saying. She would know if anybody's using those data to tell a story with the remotely sensed data, but it's possible nobody's actually started examining it yet. I don't know, but it's a pretty recent event. And you're right, it's a pulse, and that's the best thing for remote sensing. You get a pulse, and then you watch where the pulse goes. And so it would be a very good question to ask.
Okay, well, I'm asking it.
I will channel that right to my groundwater people at USGS and see what they say.
And
Thank you.
possibly the federal government wouldn't want to have that story told.
We'll have to just go where the science takes us. And I'll try GWR as well, because they do have an active program. And I'll see what anybody is taking a look right now. Thanks for the good question.
Yeah, I'm sure they'd want to know. They're all about accountability.
Efficiency and
Efficiencies and
effectiveness.
accountability. Let's see if it worked and let's measure it. And
Yeah.
I think it's a great idea. I wanted to mention that during our member meetings, one of the things that came up with the two senators was obviously our science program, but also our reliance on the best available science. And I think kind of what you've brought here today is a great example for people to understand how we're using the data, and that it is publicly available. And I think that is a real a trust building, especially with some of the senators that have constituents in the Delta, and they want to make sure that the information that we're providing is unbiased. So I really appreciated that presentation. All right, any other comments? Okay, Lisa Marie, you can keep on plugging away.
Okay. Then I think the next slide deck is the one about the AGU conference. So again, this was in DC in December. So I missed council in December. But I was very happy to be at the biggest earth science conference in the world. It's a really incredible setting. And it's a chance to hear from a really wide swath of scientists, policymakers, journalists, education practitioners, and just science practitioners across all parts of the world. So it's in the US every year, but it gets a really wide attendance, up to 30,000 some years. So I've been going there for about 20 years, and then the last 10, I've been a co-organizer of one of the most subscribed to sessions, which is on coastal carbon. I've since passed the torch on that. At this meeting, I passed it to Dr. Patty Oikawa, who's at Cal State University East Bay. So one of our local wetland scientists will take that over. But while I dropped that, I picked up a new session, and I think we have the next slide. And that was one on collaboratories. And it was one that Laurel Larson spearheaded, and we had our first meeting of that. It was a chance to hear about collaborative efforts that are happening in the Chesapeake Bay, in Louisiana, other places in the world, including the Adirondacks and so on. And I brought up this picture just to highlight sort of the importance of talking with bringing together large groups of people to talk about questions about water allocations. So this is a slide from Ted Grantham, UC Berkeley, on the Co-Equal project that you probably remember. And the graphic sort of illustrates that we have 19th century laws, 20th century infrastructure, and 21st century climate change. And so we have some thinking to do to get to some solutions for equitable management of water. The other thing that I was there for was a workshop and also a big public launch of the U.S. Greenhouse Gas Center, which is just years in the making of having an interagency effort to track emissions and have some QA or quality assurance to that, so that we can actually try to reduce emissions. Not just nature-based solutions, which I tend to work on, but also urban emissions, industrial, agricultural emissions of greenhouse gases. And this was, again, a major effort to get launched. I'm hoping that it continues, but it's just been celebrated worldwide because there's no other effort at this scale to really provide to the public information on what's happening in the atmosphere with greenhouse gases. That said, the next slide is about California's atmospheric rivers, because this was just a hot topic this year. Or actually, no, before we get there, it's the familiar faces. So, there's all these big things that are exciting, but there's also the fun part about just seeing people that here, the two folks from the California Water Science Center, Michelle Stern and Diana Zamora-Reyes, were there to talk about atmospheric rivers and groundwater modeling in California. Also, as you can see here, former Delta lead scientist Laura Larson and I are standing in front of her student's poster from UC Berkeley. And again, this is output from models that are tracking salinity intrusion into the Delta and what the sensitivity is to sea level rise. And this is in partnership with Department of Water Resources and their models as well. So it's an example of how we're actually being part of the bigger conversation at these formal conferences. Next slide is the one about atmospheric rivers. And this is actually, the top graphic is showing you what it looks like when you use hydrogeodetic data to tell a story. So for example, precipitation is that sort of rainbow line you can see, and this is the big atmospheric rivers coming in. And you can see that by tracking not just the precipitation coming in, but the responses in snow, the responses in groundwater, the responses in soil moisture, we can see how that precipitation is moving through the system. Some other, besides monitoring those atmospheric rivers and where they went, there were also papers in that session on predictions and whether these atmospheric rivers are going to be part of more drought in the future, because the pulse deliveries just make it harder for the water to last through the year and reduce drought. The last slide is on managing. So this was on forecast-informed reservoir operations. And again, collaborative efforts to work across agencies to better develop those tools. And so lots. And then I'm going to end here with just saying that the best part for me about the whole thing was just seeing the Delta pop up in talks, pop up in posters everywhere. And I really think we are not invisible. And so if people think, oh, nobody knows anything about the Delta. No. We go to science conferences, we are a special site. People understand, it's interesting. We're not alone either. The kind of problems we have here are ones that we have in other systems as well. And so I'm just highlighting here 3 posters that basically made a link to Delta issues and economics of decisions that we make here in terms of Delta exports. So I won't go into any more detail there, but I just want to say, the reason you go to conferences is to literally learn and share with others what you know.
So
and
in the
it's important.
top, oh, that picture's not there anymore, but
Yeah.
that was University of Arkansas doing something on the Delta?
Yeah, yeah. So they took the USGS that had run Cascade. It's a model that we have. They ran wet years and dry years, and he was able to show loops that happen in the Delta. So most, if you can think about it, most deltas in the world, the water just runs out in one
Yeah.
direction, and it maybe pushes back with the tides. But because we do so many operations, we have a lot of loops where the water starts here and then it comes back to the same spot.
Right.
And so he was able to illustrate that.
That was interesting though, that somebody from Arkansas is
Oh, yeah.
interested in the California Delta.
Because
Very
it's
cool,
a special
'cause
and
we're
unique
not
place.
alone.
And yeah, it does get its attention in science settings.
Very cool.
Well, I'm from Arkansas and I can tell you there are no deltas there. So you have to go outside of Arkansas to find one.
But there is a lot of rice. So
That's true, down south.
Yeah. Okay, so that is all I wanted to highlight. Again, it's just the importance of going to these meetings to learn from others, be more effective in our decision making. And then I think that's it for slides right now. On to science program activities. Okay, the Delta Science Plan workshop was last week. It was a tremendous success in terms of the diversity of attendance, how much engagement that we got. I have to highlight Tricia Lee's exceptional organization of the meeting, which made it possible to receive so much information from the attendees. The talks that we had, and this is all going to be available on the YouTube channel at some point. I'm not sure when it's going to go live, looking at communications right now. And but the support that you gave us was tremendous. I have to call you out as well. Yeah, including Carly's photos. Amazing. Thank you. But some of the key things that were there, we had Sam Luoma, the first Delta lead scientist, gave a 25-year perspective of how did we get here? What are some things we want to celebrate that we've achieved? What are some things to improve on? But he really highlighted the importance of recognizing that we finally have an integrated system. We're starting to, we actually do work together. We are collaborative in this point, and losing that is not going to be beneficial to anybody. It's a loss of something that took 25 years to build. I could go on about that talk, but we also heard from Mark Lubell from UC Davis. We heard from we had our first tribal roundtable meeting with Shingle Springs representative from the Band of Miwok, Zach Gigone, and Nina Fontana talking about allotments for Native American lands. Nina Fontana being from UC Davis. We had some great feedback there. The next day we talked, and that day we talked mostly about the who and the how data are shared. And then on day 2, we talked about what kind of data, what kind of information do we need to be more forward thinking, to work under more uncertain settings, being able to make decisions when we really are looking at an extremely variable and unknown future. And the talks of that day were by the former Delta lead scientist, Laura Larson, as well as the former chair of the Independent Science Board, Lisa Wanger. And the best part of the meeting was the feedback. We had a mentee survey, we had in-room active questions and answers, and then we had breakout groups where we took all of these great ideas that were being generated and put them into a matrix of impact and effort. And what we were looking for, what can we do to have high impact? And ideally high impact with low efforts, or like a quick win. We had a lot of good ideas there, but a lot of them were the bigger ones, high effort, high impact. And I think these are some ideas that will come forward in the Delta Science Plan draft that you should be seeing this fall, which is focusing on addressing the grand challenges, not just saying, oh, we have this challenge, but here's how we're going to address it. And those were the good ideas that came up in the room. And I think the other thing important to say is that this is a fundamental reshuffling of how the Delta Science Plan is structured, because instead of having 26 bullets of all the kind of key things we're interested in, this one is a focus on 4 big challenges that we can address as a community. And so the general feedback has been that this is more inclusive and probably more effective, more targeted in terms of its ability to be to move the needle on important science planning. Okay, so that is all for the Delta Science Plan workshop. But again, watching it online, I highly suggest some of those speakers to be tuned into because they were really good. Okay, the next thing is move into On Your Radar. Next week, really important meeting, the Interagency Ecological Program has their annual workshop. It's in the California Natural Resources Agency building as usual. And then our specific extra workshop is the first meeting of the cyanobacterial HABs, harmful algal bloom implementation plan for the strategy. And so that is the first meeting is on Thursday. Again, you can call in or you can attend in person, but there's 10 speakers. And the partnerships we have with that, with Department of Water Resources, USGS, and State Water Board are basically bringing all those teams to the table to talk about how are we going to start implementing this strategy across agencies. And then the last thing on your radar would be the microplastic pollution symposium that is coming up in May, on May 9th. And that one, the website is up. You can see the speakers lined up, again, across a broad swath of agencies and academic backgrounds. The focus is on impacts of microplastics, not just tracking them. And again, for that one, it's going to be live streamed and recorded. So if you can't be there in person, although we hope you are, you can watch that at a later date. But registration is required, and there is a registration link in here. And then I think that is all for the things to be on your radar, except for the golden mussel needing to be on your radar. So you have this fabulous sample that Elizabeth Brusati was able to procure from Boating and Waterways. This is our new invader. This is not a friend. And I think you'll hear more about this in the performance measures because we're going to start tracking this. But at the Independent Science Board meeting in January, we heard from CDFW, we heard from Tom Jabush from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife about the Interagency Golden Mussel Task Force. You know, there's a rapid response. There's an effort right now to control it. You can see here, we have some slides there, I think, coming up. But I think the key point is that there's no known controls on this right now. So the goal right now is just containment, because I think you can see the impacts are pretty severe to our water infrastructure, not to mention the ecosystem. There's what you're going to start to see soon. So this map, I think, might be going into a little bit more detail by Scott Navarro next. But, you know, it was discovered in September with a routine sampling out in Stockton at Rough and Ready Island. And rapidly we went out to see where it is, and we're seeing, and it does seem to be spreading from that location. And so, yeah, this is a really tolerant animal. And so, you know, the controls aren't very clear right now. So the goal is containment. And I think the next slide shows you, what's that?
Biggest danger.
They grow very, very fast, and they block up water treatment. I'm sorry, water passageways. So they just clog pumps, clog
boats.
Yeah, on boats too. You can
Yeah.
use your boats in the water. Absolutely. Yeah, so it's a problem when it's been found in other countries where it's moved. But this is the first, I think what the really important thing is, this is the first sighting of this particular, of golden mussel in all of North America. So this is we're the first hit, and it looks to be spreading. And so the next slide is how the Interagency Task Force hopes to stop the spread, which is basically put these signs up and try to reduce, try to contain the distribution. there's going to be a follow-up presentation at the ISB meeting in March, on March 20th. And it's Chris Skiana from the State Lands Commission is going to talk about the ballast regulations and how did this get out, and what are the real issues of effectiveness of the interventions that we can do, and both state and federal limitations to that.
Member Burgess.
So when I was in Washington, D.C. a couple of weeks ago, we were bringing this issue to the attention of our congressional members. What is the norm of getting federal assistance? Because this, while we focus on the Delta, this is not just a Delta issue. This is an issue that could spread because people have boats and they go different places. And we're still figuring out what the best way of handling this is. But I would love to have a sample to take to DC to show them if it's possible. And what is it that we can ask of our federal and state leaders to act on this instead of waiting?
I'd love to see you promote this at that scale, because you're right, it started here, but it's not a California issue. Right now it's the USDA that tracks invasive species. I do not know how they're situated right now with the federal.
Okay, well, we
restrictions.
can encourage our congressional members to inquire with USDA if at least.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. That's a great idea. Oh,
We're
very
passing
good.
it around the audience.
Yes, no eating them. But yeah, thanks so much for getting that, Elizabeth. That was a win. Should we go to by the numbers real quick?
Sure.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Result of, are they more in the light of climate change? Oh my. Is it impacted by climate change more or less, or just the reason that they showed up?
Yeah, no, I think it's a ballast water release. And so, identifying the vehicle, the boat that they're from, I think that cat's out of the bag. I don't think we can do that at this point, but it was brought here from, oh my gosh, I've already forgotten the source. Do you guys remember?
Was it South America?
Yeah, I thought it was Brazil, but then now I'm thinking Brazil has an invasion problem.
Oh,
is it China? Okay.
It's spread all to South America.
Yeah, it's already there. Yeah, it's the first hit in North America. Yeah.
Wow. That's like a major threat to a lot of things.
It really is. Yeah. And it's an incredibly tolerant species. So it's not like, it's going to be easy to knock them out.
Yeah. And knock them out will have some water quality implications too, right?
Yeah.
Chances
I guess, yeah, pick your battles about what, what you're willing to tolerate to remove them. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so by the numbers, I think the really important thing to see here is that compared to January, we have more water because we had atmospheric rivers. And the bump ups for rainfall and for snowpack are almost like 10% across the board. So everything just got picked up. Central Sierra, for example, was more like 54% of historic average for precipitation in January, and now we're at 70%. So it bumped up quite a bit. And then the reservoirs are still in very similar condition in terms of, being above average and still having quite a bit of remaining capacity. The really interesting thing here was if you look at the Sacramento River at Freeport, that flow of 68,000 cubic feet per second, that is 229% higher than the historical average. And I had to go back through all the old by the numbers just to see, have we ever seen anything like this before? Because just so you know, in January, that value was 130% higher. And we thought, oh, wow, that's the Sacramento is flowing really high. This is 100% more than it was in January. I just want to put this in perspective, like that this is why the river's so high when you see it off the side of the road, right? So yeah, I have not seen this flow in a by the numbers since 2013. So that's incredibly high. But that said, that doesn't mean that it's never flown. Of course, we've had these high flows. It's just that it hasn't been part of a by the numbers report since then. So just want to highlight that's really high. And then at the funny part, sorry, it's not funny. The Sacramento River flow at Vernalis is only 30% of what its historical average. So you have this just absolutely raging river here, and then a trickle coming in from the south. So there's a real difference. Again, the north and the south in terms of where the water fell. So I think those are sort of the big points there. And then the diversions, the outflows are a little bit higher, but they're not that much higher than the historical average. And they're only a little bit higher than, they're only about 1,000 cubic feet higher than they were in January. So just wanted to put this in perspective compared to where we were a month ago. Any other questions or thoughts on?
Nope, don't see any. Thank you so much for that. Super informative. Don't see any other member comments, so I'll ask them if we have any public comment on this item.
We have no public comment in West Sacramento. Councilmember Zingali, do you have any public comment?
No public comments here.
All right, we have no public comment.
All right, thank you. Next, our agenda item number 9 is the Delta Plan performance measures. So we'll have our panel, Jeff Henderson, Deputy Executive Officer of Planning and Performance, Martina Kohler, Program Manager, Planning and Performance, Scott Navarro, and Hannah Cheney, also from Planning and Performance. And they're going to present an annual update on several of the Delta Plan performance measures. I think we've had conversations in the past about how we track our successes and how we measure whether or not things that are being implemented are making a difference. So this will be a very interesting topic for us to hear on. So take it away, Jeff.
Thank you, Chair Lee. Good morning, council members. I'm glad to be here today to kick off our 2024 year in review for the Delta Plan performance measures. I'm joined by Martina Kohler, Scott Navarro, and Hannah Cheney from our Performance Management Unit, who will describe key data updates for our performance measures in 2024. We're also joined by Sea Grant Fellow Dane Wicker, who is responsible for the great podcasts that Jessica mentioned earlier. Next slide, please. Actually, could we get the PowerPoint up, please? Great, thank you. So the Delta Reform Act requires that the Delta Plan include quantified or otherwise measurable targets associated with achieving the objectives of the Delta Plan. And to fulfill this requirement, the plan includes performance measures that track environmental and administrative changes taking place due to policies and recommendations in the Delta Plan in relation to time-specific, measurable performance targets. The Delta Plan performance measures allow the council to integrate science and monitoring results into decision-making concerning priorities and funding, to inform adaptive management, and to track progress toward achieving the co-equal goals over time. In 2013, the Delta Plan included an initial set of performance measures. Revised performance measures were then adopted by the council in 2018 as part of the Delta Plan amendments. And the 2022 Ecosystem Amendment added new performance measures and revised some of the existing measures concerning the Delta ecosystem. The performance measures consist of science-based metrics, baselines, and targets aligned with one or more Delta Plan policies or recommendations. The baseline and target values were established for the first time in 2018 for many of the measures, so about 7 years ago. The first year the data was evaluated for the newer ecosystem performance measures was 2 years ago in 2023. The Council's Performance Management Unit tracks and evaluates the performance measures continually and reports the findings to the Council annually, and this is our 2024 report. I'll now hand it over to Martina and our performance measures team to provide the annual update. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Good morning, council members. Next slide, please. So today we will be presenting on several of the performance measures listed here on the slide because they observed interesting changes over the past years and provide some insights into the effectiveness of our collective management actions in the Delta and the watershed. Our subject matter experts from the Performance Management Unit, Scott and Hannah, will walk us through these important annual highlights and provide details about why these updates are important. And it's exciting to be here today to present this report because for the first time we are including some of the new performance measures added by the Delta Plan Ecosystem Amendment. And also we will be hearing from Dane virtually also with some insights about the podcast production. That's for me. I will pass to Scott.
Next slide. Next slide, please. Good morning, council members. My name is Scott Navarro. I'm a senior environmental scientist with the Performance Measures Unit. So I'll be starting us off with the water supply and water quality performance measures. But first, we'll talk about how 2024 was in terms of the water conditions. Water year 2024 had normal amounts of precipitation. However, it had the hottest summers on record. We just wanted to highlight this just to set the stage for the performance measures that we'll be talking about today. Next slide, please. So up first is the urban water supply performance measure. We have this performance measure to monitor improvements in urban water conservation and water use efficiency. Efficient use of urban water supply supports the Delta Reform Act to reduce reliance on Delta water by reducing demand for water and improving regional self-reliance. So the targets set out back in 2010 to reduce urban water use by 20% by 2020 were achieved statewide. This is somewhat older news, which was achieved a couple of years ago, but we wanted to highlight this achievement just to provide quick context. What is notable for 2024 was that the State Water Resources Control Board recently adopted a new regulation requiring urban water suppliers to establish an annual objective for indoor and outdoor water use. This regulation is now in effect as of the start of this year. This newly established water conservation goals are expected to reduce urban water use by more than 400,000 acre-feet by 2030, helping California adapt to the impact of the water supply brought on by climate change. This new regulation would help realize the water savings outlined in California's water supply strategy, which was published back in 2022. In addition, the reporting of these new water use objectives will be reported, and the performance metric will be refined in the future to include this as a data source in the future. Next slide, please. Now talking about Delta salinity, we measure this performance measure because salinity is a key part of any estuary, but especially for the Delta. Salinity can cause impacts to agriculture, municipal drinking water uses, and ecosystem beneficial uses. We track this a couple of ways. By tracking what's called the State Water Resources Control Board's D1641 salinity objectives, excuse me, which set specific water quality objectives in different parts of the Delta and are tracked via monitoring stations and reported by the State Water Resources Control Board if a monitoring station does not meet the objectives. Additionally, we also track what is referred to as X2. X2 is the distance in kilometers from the Golden Gate Bridge where salinity is 2 parts per thousand of isohaline salt. This salinity habitat is designed to support native species in the Delta, specifically the Delta and longfin smelt. So in 2024, water quality compliance for salinity was maintained and met at all compliance monitoring stations within the Delta and Sassoon Marsh. The most notable detail event here is regarding X2. Usually the X2 requirement is maintained at 80 kilometers at or below 80 kilometers for September and October. Shown in the map above 80 kilometers is right above, I believe that's Pittsburgh, Montezuma Slough. But the Department of Fish and Wildlife temporarily amended X2 to only be required in September, in addition to augmenting to operate the Sassoon Marsh salinity control gates for the rest of September. The October X2 action requirement was not required. This minor amendment to X2 was one of those adaptive management actions based on scientific data that the 2019 biological opinion provides. It is said that this amendment is to allow an extra 150,000 acre-feet of water to be delivered at a later date. And this may provide equal or even more benefits for native species. This is the first time it has happened, at least since the tracking of this performance measure. Next slide, please. Moving on to harmful algal blooms, or what's known as HABs for short. HABs are a persistent issue in the Delta and forms when specific cyanobacteria is in high enough densities and produces toxins at a high enough concentration that could prove to be harmful to humans and wildlife. Variables that help produce HABs include low water flows, warm temperatures, and high nutrient levels. And we track this using a satellite monitoring tool that detects the densities of cyanobacteria, as well as supplemented by on-the-ground incidence reporting by the public and others local agencies. So in 2024, as highlighted in the red circles in the graph, there were low instances of high formations of cyanobacteria densities by the satellite monitoring tool, but not zero. This is relative to the previous years during the droughts of 21 and 22. I do want to add a disclaimer that just because a water body exceeds a cyanobacterial threshold does not mean that a HABs has occurred. And like I mentioned earlier, we supplement this information with the incident reporting tool, where volunteers and local agencies report their HABs instances, and incidences were also not as widespread. However, it was still an issue in the south part of the Delta in the community of Discovery Park. The results in 2024 could, there's plenty of variables. Oh, sorry. Oh, Discovery Bay, sorry. Yeah. Sorry. This result for 2024 may be due to the water conditions as well as the previous wet year, providing adequate flows and cooler temperatures that are not conducive to HABs. One thing to highlight that was already brought up by Lisa Marie is the cyanobacteria HABs monitoring strategy. And we just wanted to highlight this as an overall monitoring program for the Delta. Is going to be extremely important and would help accurately track the status of HABs in the Delta, and hopefully will provide future data for this performance measure. And now I'll be passing it on to Hannah.
All right, thank you, Scott, and good morning, Council. My name is Hannah Cheney. I also work with the Performance Measures Unit, and I'll be walking you through some of the PMs that I work with today. The first PM I will be going over is for sustainable groundwater. Oh, can you go to the next slide? I'm so sorry. Okay, thank you. The first PM I'll be going over today is for the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, otherwise known as SGMA. I do want to clarify that this is an administrative PM, meaning that this describes decisions made by policymakers and managers to finalize plans or approve resources. This basically means that this PM is currently only tracking the timeline of SGMA's implementation and therefore has no quantifiable metrics. SGMA is a landmark law that was passed in 2014 to achieve long-term sustainability in California's groundwater basins by 2040. SGMA required local agencies to adopt groundwater sustainability plans for high priority and medium priority groundwater basins. The law also requires agencies to report out on groundwater sustainability data on an annual and a 5-year basis. SGMA created an unprecedented framework for groundwater status tracking. Given the achievements in data monitoring, we are hoping to expand this PM's tracking ability by including quantifiable metrics such as tracking progress towards sustainable pumping levels and overall water supply. We also have an interest in reporting on projects that can capture water and recharge groundwater supply during times of surplus. I also wanted to add in relation to SGMA that Proposition 4 that was passed by California late last year does specify groundwater as a priority in its Chapter 2 on drinking water, and grants amounting to approximately $586 million specify groundwater as a priority, with 200 million of this pertaining directly to projects that support the implementation of SGMA. Next slide. Now I'll move into the more ecosystem-oriented performance measures. The first one I want to start with, I'll give a little context on. The Delta Reform Act called for the Delta Plan to provide a long-term approach to restoring habitats within the Delta. To track progress on this goal, a set of new performance measures were created and implemented under the Ecosystem Amendment passed in 2022. So this is basically one of the newer performance measures. Here we are tracking the number of acres that are reopened by restoration projects to land water connections. This describes the riparian, floodplain, tidal, and non-tidal habitat types. The ecological health of the Delta is fundamentally dependent on reestablishment of more land-water connections. One of the major reasons for this is these lands provide a large amount of food for native and aquatic species, as well as birds. Since 2008, 12,500 acres have been restored through ecosystem multi-benefit projects. Additionally, about 9,300 acres are listed as in progress or in planning for across the Delta. If all planned projects are implemented, we will have about 22,000 acres, or 36% of the way towards this 2050 target. Next slide. One project I wanted to highlight in relation to this performance measure is the Lookout Slough Improvement Project that was implemented by DWR and completed in late 2024. This project restored over 3,000 acres of tidal wetland by reconnecting land to tidal flows. This single project made up a significant part of the 12,500 acres of land water restoration projects that have been added to the Delta since 2008. Next slide. All right, so moving into my next performance measure, which is subsidence reversal and carbon sequestration. I do want to make a caveat here that this isn't the same type of subsidence that we were discussing earlier based on groundwater depletion, but this is a subsidence that's more specific to the Delta. Much of the Delta is sinking through a process called subsidence, which is caused by the drainage of Delta wetlands and the subsequent oxidation of peat soil. This oxidation releases a massive amount of greenhouse gas emissions and results in the physical lowering of the Delta elevation. The areas that are most severely impacted by subsidence in the Delta are located in the central Delta. So I provided, I don't know if you could see it super well, but it's in the bottom right corner, kind of a map of like the central Delta highlighting the Sherman and Twitchell Islands that are most affected by this type of subsidence. Subsidence can be halted or reversed when water is brought back onto the landscape, which can occur through wetland creation or rice farming. 2008 marked the start of substantial subsidence project creation in the Delta. And now there are about 3,700 acres credited to DWR efforts on the Sherman and Twitchell Islands. Projects can serve as a potential source of revenue for the carbon market because they reduce greenhouse gas emissions. I also wanted to highlight a set of new subsidence projects that are funded by the Delta Conservancy that plan to convert about 11,000 acres into subsidence project acreage. Once completed, these acres added with the existing acres will be about 15,000 acres, or halfway to this 2030 goal of 30,000. All right, next slide. All right, so my final PM is the Yola bypass floodplain inundation. For this one, when flooded, the Yolo bypass contributes to the growth of migratory fish species and benefits Delta food webs by restoring floodplain ecological functions. It also serves as a flood control structure for the city of Sacramento. The target time duration of flooding we aim for is 2 to 3 weeks, which was chosen based on research demonstrating improved outcomes for select aquatic species, namely the juvenile Chinook salmon. In the right top corner there, you can see a picture of Chinook salmon from the Sacramento River versus the Cosumnes floodplain. This is kind of a semi-famous picture called the floodplain fatties, and that's because the Cosumnes River fish are clearly bigger than ones of similar age from the Sacramento River. And this is just a testament to how much food that floodplain ecosystems like Cosumnes River and Yolo Bypass provide for these types of fish. I also wanted to show you the map below it, which is kind of serves as an indicator of how much 17,000 acres of flooding in the Yolo Bypass is. This is taken from the UC Davis Hester Lab Group and shows an inundation level of 15,000 acres as recorded by Sentinel-1 late this January. The purple is the total area of the Yolo Bypass, and the yellow shows the flooded areas. And that's just kind of serves as a reference for how much, about how much 17,000 acres is. So one exciting thing about this performance measure is that for the past 2 years, we have met both targets of 2 to 3 weeks of inundation. Also exciting is that the implementation of the Big Notch project, which is a 30,000 acre floodplain habitat restoration project in the Yolo Bypass led by DWR and Bureau of Reclamation, is anticipated to be operational by late 2025. And this project is slated to help us reach our target a little bit more frequently in years to come, just because of the expansion of the floodplain. All right, and next slide. Yeah, I just wanted to end by saying that this PM, the Yolo Bypass inundation, is especially fun to present on right now because the bypass is inundated. I live in Davis, and this is a picture that I took coming to Sacramento on the Amtrak from work last week. So I encourage, if you haven't checked it out already or been stuck on the 80, that, yeah, just get out there and appreciate it in its full glory. Thank you so much.
Sorry, it's coming back to me. So up next, speaking of salmons, the fish passage performance measure. So the Delta serves as a migratory corridor for all anadromous species in the Delta, such as the Chinook salmon, as previously talked about by Hannah. Migratory fish passage is very limited in the Delta watershed due to centuries of man-made divergence, structures, and urban development. These barriers to fish passage restrict or reduce access to their historic habitats, including their spawning grounds, and these areas such as those streams above large dams in the Delta watershed. In addition, these migratory species, like salmon, also are socially and culturally important, especially for the native peoples and tribes of California. So how we track this PM, we track it 2 ways: by tracking the barriers to fish passage that California Department of Fish and Wildlife and Department of Water Resources have compiled to prioritize. And we also track any action towards species restoration at dams surrounding the Delta watershed. So in 2024, as of 2024, there were a combined 5 sites out of 57 identified in the baseline that fixed barriers to fish passage. This might not seem like a lot, but this includes several that are currently ongoing, which means they're either in their planning stages, conducting feasibility studies, or currently being implemented. The Department of Fish and Wildlife list also is regularly updated and has already shown another barrier being fixed in the past 5 years. Now, for larger dams around the Delta, such as those in Shasta, Oroville, Folsom, there are a couple of projects to highlight. Back in 2023, the Yuba Water Agency and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration announced an agreement to restore the Yuba River. This includes building a new fishway a new bypass will be built around Dagger Point Dam. This also includes a reintroduction effort of salmonids in their historic habitat above the new Bullard's Bar Dam up in the North Yuba River, and is currently ongoing. In addition, on the Sacramento River, studies were conducted to evaluate the feasibility and viability of collecting juvenile salmonids as they emigrate out of their historic habitat upstream from Shasta Dam in the McCloud River. This project in the Shasta Dam is a collaborative effort between the Winnemem-Wintu tribe, federal and state agencies, and is the first step of a program to return endangered Chinook salmon to their historic habitats. Next slide, please. Now, for the last PM that we'll be talking about is invasive species. And just a brief background, invasive species are plants, animals, or invertebrates that are not native to the ecosystem. And once introduced and established, they can reproduce and spread quickly, and then it can cause harm to native wildlife, the economy, and even human health. Now, for this performance measure, the invasive species PM is actually a very diverse PM, but we wanted to focus on the non-native invasive introductions. And our target is 0. We would want no new introductions of invasive species. I'd like to start us off with a familiar face with nutria. That's not a new invasive species, but it was introduced in 2018 in the Delta and 2017 here in California. And the nutria is a highly invasive, non-native semi-aquatic mammal that continues to proliferate in the Delta despite eradication efforts. 2024 had the highest take ever within the Delta at 361 individual nutria out of the total 685 since the program began in 2017. So just in this past year, there was almost doubling of the take in the Delta. They're mostly found in the western part of the Delta and Sassoon Marsh, as shown in the map on the bottom right. The next one is the golden mussel. Lisa Murray already talked about kind of like a brief background on this. Next slide, please. But I just wanted to highlight a couple of photos here. So on the top left, you see over there, those are of quagga mussels, which are established in the eastern part of the continental US, as well as the Colorado River Basin and Southern California. They are similar to golden mussels in terms of like their habitat types and how they establish. And that's just an example of a cooling pipe in the Lake Mead in Nevada, which took them 6 months to fully encrust that pipe right there. On the bottom left, on the bottom left are golden mussels attaching to a survey buoy that was a survey conducted by DWR a couple of months ago. And you can see how fast it's kind of just encrusted that survey buoy. And then on the right there is the map of current distribution of the golden mussels, at least of 2024. You can see that it's mainly around the central part of the Delta, as well as the southern part of the Delta and the pumping plants. And they've also spotted some on the San Luis Reservoir down there. And with that, I think that should be it. I'll be passing it on to Dane Wicker.
Hey, good morning, council members. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. My name is Dane Wicker. I'm a 2024 California Sea Grant Fellow with the Planning and Performance Division. I've been helping them out with their outreach efforts, among a lot of other things. So next slide, please. One more. Thank you. This performance measure data that my team has been talking about is very powerful, as I hope you can see, but it can be a lot, especially if you are somebody who is without a background in science or policy, or is just kind of looking to understand why we are tracking these things that we are. So early on in my fellowship here, we identified a need for accessible communication of this data. And from that need, the podcast series, The Delta Dispatch, was born. You heard some audio from the podcast a little bit earlier in the executive officer report. What this podcast really seeks to do is pick a few relevant and timely topics from the Delta Plan and explain performance measure data that tracks that topic, which includes why that data matters and what it actually looks like on the ground out in the Delta. By taking some of the science jargon out and addressing these topics in a more story-driven way, my aim for the series was to be a great starting point for anybody who wants to learn about Delta topics. And really the heart of this entire process are the amazing guests that we've been able to interview, pictured there on the right. At the outset of the project, we really wanted to represent both the science and policy experts as well as the members of the Delta communities that we serve. So each episode has 2 guests that speak to each topic, and the end product, I hope, is something that anybody can relate to and get entertainment from while learning about these really important issues. As mentioned, we do have 3 episodes live right now. The final 2, I believe, are set to air in the coming month. So really exciting stuff, and I'm really happy to have had the opportunity. And with that, I will pass it back to Martina. Thank you.
Next slide. The next slide. Yeah. So thank you, Dane, and everyone. So to wrap up the presentation, you heard several important findings tracked by the performance measures that help us evaluate the effectiveness of management actions. All the information that you heard is available, and more is available on the performance measures dashboard. The dashboard serves as a one-stop location for the information and to view all the performance measures, and we continually update that information and post it as it becomes available. The performance measures not only provide the view into what is happening in the Delta, but they also inform the decisions. For example, in the recently completed 5-year review of the Delta plan, the council used the performance measures to rate the 10-year progress in implementing the Delta plan. And these performance measure report cards then in turn informed the recommendations for council's priorities for the next 5 years. Another example how the performance measures could be used is the DPIC restoration subcommittee and how it's using the summary of what has been restored to inform its next steps and in agency coordination and addressing the institutional barriers to restoration. Next slide, please. And so finally, I would like to close in kind of what's up ahead for us. When we use the performance measures in the 5-year review, we identified several opportunities how to expand and revise the performance measures with new metrics, new information, new science, new tools. For example, as Hannah mentioned, and Lisa Marie also talked about that, we will be looking into wealth of data coming from the Sigma implementation and how to track specific outcomes, such as groundwater levels, reduction of dry wells, or amount of water used for aquifer recharge. We also started compiling new information related to Delta land subsidence and looking for metrics for changes in land elevation, soil accretion rates, and carbon fluxes that could help inform establishing additional targets for subsidence halting and reversal. And another kind of large area for expanding the performance measures is looking for new metrics for the human dimensions. We are looking into leveraging other recent council efforts, such as the Delta Resident Survey, and compiling information on Delta disadvantaged communities, social vulnerability, and socioeconomic indicators to provide a more comprehensive picture about Delta SPLICE components. We will also continue to work with our partners to provide them our information, but also feature their progress and accomplishments in implementing the Delta plan. And we are also planning to continue expanding the dashboard with new tools and functionalities so that the performance measures deliver useful and effective and transparent information to our broad, diverse audiences. So next slide. And with that, that's going to end, and I think we can open to questions and comments.
Yes, do any members have questions? Member Burgess.
Okay, great, good stuff, interesting. So one of the first things, Scott, when you were talking in one of the first slides, you were talking about how we had a really wet year, and yet we had one of the hottest summers, and it made me curious. Is there a formula to determine the impacts on water related to higher temperatures? Does that mean we have more evaporation, I would guess? I don't know what I'm talking about, so I can just guess. Or is there higher demand on water because of the higher temperatures? So do we have some sort of idea? Because the good news is we had 70 to 130% of normal precipitation. The bad news is we had these higher temperatures, but what does that mean to our water supply? And that's a pretty complicated question, and I need a simple answer. No, I'm kidding. But it just made me kind of question, what does that mean?
That is a very complicated question, and some folks may be able to answer that better than me that are present here. I would say yes. Yes, we did have a good amount of precipitation, but there's going to be impacts when the temperatures are that high. I mean, it was like 2 weeks where it was 100 degrees here in Sacramento. Evaporation, although it didn't reflect in like, for example, harmful algal blooms, like if that happens, for a longer duration due to climate change, then we might start seeing a lot more impacts. But because of, the snowpack and water reserved in the dams, the temperatures in the sloughs and downstream were a little cooler. So
Right. Just curious. So then we went over a bunch of different goals, and these are goals, but we're not the ones that are doing the work. Am I correct? So these are guidelines or goals that we're setting for various agencies. Is that what we're doing?
Yeah, essentially, I mean, these are the goals that the Delta Plan sets for everybody. Kind of like those aspirational goals that we would like to see to kind of get toward the co-equal goals, right, at the high level.
Is
But
there
it's
any?
collectively, like everybody plays a role, or each agency or each program has certain role, and we just want to provide that information and kind of some visibility into that.
So this is it backed up by budgets and commitments, or is this again just goals that we're setting and encouraging?
In terms of budgets and commitments, I think that's gonna vary by program. We have had instances where we established a performance measure, relied on a data source, and that data source went away.
Right.
So to that degree, we are reliant on other agencies and the funding that they receive.
That's kind of what I was expecting. And, I was looking at some of these numbers, some of these goal dates are just 6 years away, and we haven't even met halfway those numbers. But again, this is just aspirations, goals, recommendations because of the different other goals that we have, correct?
Correct. And again, the intent here is to measure and report. And if we are hitting those cases, like you mentioned, where we're 5 years away from a goal and maybe only 20% in, that's an indication of the need for a policy shift.
Do we also report out the benefits if we can see those from decreases in HABs or increases in fish passage or decreases in invasives?
We do through the View Performance website that was mentioned, as well as some of those things have been highlighted in some of the podcasts and our other communication tools.
And the last thing I'd say is I think this is a really great presentation for folks to kind of understand all of the different things that need to be done. For the podcast, I have this, and I've told you, Jeff, I have this old book from, I think, 2008 that goes over who does what as far as state agencies related to water. And I think that would be an amazing water or a podcast to just talk about, because we have so many different agencies that are working on different segments of this that are all impacted. I think that'd be a great podcast. But thank you for this presentation. Very interesting.
Thank you. Member Zingali.
Thank you. I have two questions, one about two different performance measures. The first is water supply, the second is ecosystem restoration. And on water supply, it's kind of the same question that I asked Lisa Marie, but in a different context. So when you're now looking at the water supply performance measure for 2025, do we anticipate being able to take advantage of the new tool? Lisa Marie talked about the hydro geodesy satellite, and thereby get specific about an incident like the one that occurred early this year of releasing water. And the reason I'm asking is related to something you just said, Diane, which is about accountability by specificity. Like, it's one thing to say we're not reaching the goals, we are reaching the goals, but if we're not reaching the goals and people can actually see where we're failing, I think it's easier for there to be accountability. So just curious if you guys are excited or anticipate using that new tool.
Well, I think definitely. I think that that's kind of the point is that maybe the metrics we have right now would not be able to use that information, but that's exactly, I guess, what we want to use some any new tools that are coming our way or that are available to get a better picture and maybe use it in the next 5 years for either like specific situations, it was in January or in generally, you know, like the annual changes, whether they, you know, kind of like track that conditions. So yes, we will be using newly available data and tools as we have them. I think that's the whole point, and it's kind of part of the revisions as well, that we would like to kind of look for new data sources and establishing new metrics that kind of next time when we come, we have a more holistic and more robust answers. Melissa Marie, you want to add to that?
Good, thank you. I look forward to that.
Thank you for the question. And I appreciated Martina's answer. Sigma actually does use INSAR to look at subsidence. They're not using it to track the plug of water as it's moving through, but they are tracking subsidence on their website. So that might be, they might already have some of the data that you want if you can.
Thanks again. And then my question on the ecosystem restoration relates to something you were saying, Jeff, just about seeing where, you know, there's a yellow or red kind of warning light flashing in terms of progress. Because I think if my rudimentary math is right here on ecosystem restoration, we've accomplished about 12.5 thousand in 18 years. The goal is to get to 60 to 80,000 in the next 25. So without accounting for any variables that may differentiate between this recent period and the future, just basic math would say we'll only be maybe halfway there by goal year 2050. So is the headline really in the ecosystem restoration that we're seriously behind?
Yes. Yes.
Speak up.
Yes, and that was illustrated in the
5-year
report
review.
cards as
Yeah.
part of the 5-year review.
That's
and I think
right.
it's indicative of the efforts you see being put forward in things like 30 by 30 and cutting the green tape and some of these other initiatives that are recognizing that urgency, recognizing that we're behind pace, and trying to marshal resources to move us more quickly towards the goal.
Yeah, and again, I think there'd be some benefit to the extent we can get more detail or specificity about where and who we're failing is, I think would be more likely to get better results.
I think this is why we've decided as part of the Delta Plan Interagency Committee to, I mean, that's the one, working group that we have put all our resources into, is to gather practitioners of restoration and to identify barriers to getting those acres on the ground and resources that they can access, including, making sure that they know how to navigate the permitting processes for those projects, that they're working with the landowners and those who are impacted so that there's less opposition to the projects and they can move more quickly. Funding is certainly a huge barrier. A lot of the restoration that's done in the Delta right now is done because it's required as mitigation of the state water contractors. So other than that, there's not a lot of funding that's just available for, feel good, right reason restoration, right? Where only when there's damage that's particularly assigned to someone, does there seem to be funding available. So that's just kind of a governance challenge that we have. I think the good news on restoration is the pace has been significantly faster. So I think if that pace continues, then there is a greater chance that we meet the 2050 target, but that there's a big question there, particularly with federal uncertainty and regulatory uncertainty.
Thank you, Jessica. Yeah, maybe this is a communications suggestion, but I think when we have these summaries, that we shouldn't bury the lead. You know, if in fact we're way behind, we should say it. Even, you know, I know the report card did that, but I think in every opportunity we have, we should just be very transparent about that.
Yeah, I agree. Maria?
Comments are within the same, you know, realm. And what it is like specifically on Sigma. I mean, Sigma has been a very important regulation, and we know in the past 2 years a lot of the a lot of the regions have missed and failed to meet their goals and didn't do it. So what I'm again, you know, encouraging us is to highlight that. And you know, here when we say major improvements in groundwater, I mean, either specifically say in a certain area, but when we report something like this in that light, it doesn't make sense for water practitioners or, you know, these, you know, anywhere in the state that are very close to the reality of they know where Sigma is. So that's, I would like to encourage, and I think it's just the same conversation that we had. I'm just urging us to do that. And then my other question, one more question that I have is on carbon sequestration. And we kind of like went on passing, but the efforts, if you could shed light on it. And we know, you know, the pit soil and all that, but what is the specific measures taken in that, if you could shed light on it?
Yeah, like the specific measures for, I mean, the data that we're looking at is for CO2 and methane sequestration. Like we are, like for a lot of these projects, they avoid emitting some of these emissions. So something that we're interested in reporting on in the future is like to what amount and how much this translates into carbon credits that can potentially be sold on the market. Is that what you were asking?
Yeah, I'm just trying to ask the measures. Everybody talks about it, right? That they are doing things, and well, we know what happens at the Delta all the time, and are they specific? And you have reported in previously, I think we've had these meetings where we talked about the rice and flooding these areas and all that.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to see if these are the same measures that continues to be taken. And again, vis-a-vis the goal where we are, because we don't always have to be the good news people, right? I mean, we can't say where things are.
Yeah.
The main approach is keeping water on the land. That's how you stop subsidence reversal. I mean, the good news is that like, you know, mechanically speaking, we have a solution to that problem. But from a funding perspective and an incentives structure perspective, there are challenges.
Not only funding, but progress. You know, I mean, we're reporting progress. I know the measure. The measure is to keep water in these areas. But then, and same with Sigma and all these others. You know, I mean, we have to accurately say where we are and if we're missing, you know, or not, or the points, the goals by when. Because with that, we also call attention to a lot of, you know, we bring crisis to the issue, which when you bring crisis to the issue, I think then it gets more attention.
Yeah, I think the challenge we all suffer from in the Delta is people get crisis fatigue. I'm serious, right? It's like everything in the Delta is a crisis. When the 2009 Delta Reform Act passed, that was in response to a crisis. And it's challenging to keep the attention of the people who aren't directly working on the Delta every day to advance measures to fix some of these problems.
The crisis fatigue is about all the infrastructure throughout the state. So true. Thank you.
All right. I also have a question about the groundwater, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. So we have been tracking the progress of the implementation of the act. So are we shifting focus to now how we actually measure and track groundwater itself? And it sounds like we have some tools available for that. So are we contemplating new performance measures to shift from the implementation more to the actual groundwater measurement?
Yeah, so kind of what I was getting at there is, for right now, we're only tracking the implementation and like the steps to that. But we're taking, so this year was like Sigma's 10th year anniversary. And so like what I was kind of talking about with like the report outs that like these basins are doing on a yearly and a 5-year basis. We want to take some of the data from that, particularly like how do pumping rates compare to like what Councilmember Hoyso was talking about earlier with like how much the aquifer is recharged per year. That's called sustainable yield. That's something that we're curious about tracking into the future. I also, touched on a little bit too, like how we are interested, because a big theme at a lot of like Sigma related conferences is like, how are we going to capture that water in years of supply? That's been like a big theme with like these wet years we've been having. So that's another, like, how are we going to track how many of those projects are, like what barriers they are. And I really appreciated with Lisa Marie how she, talking about like where geographically would be the most impactful. So we're kind of weighing all of that right now. We're not going to propose a new performance measure or anything. We want to build on kind of what we have and the flexibility there. But does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be helpful for the council to see when we start analyzing what new performance measures we might be contemplating, to kind of have a before and after, some kind of a comparison that shows where we're shifting focus on the performance measures or building upon what we've learned. You know, we started out with an initial set and now we have more data is available. So how are we shifting that? I think that would be a good thing for us to be able to take a look at. I guess the other thing I'd like to ask is, do we feel like over the years that we have found gaps in our performance measures? In other words, are we contemplating any new things that we might want to start thinking about measuring and tracking?
Yeah, again, I think we have the whole technical appendix in the 5-year review, I think, about that. So we have identified gaps kind of at different things, something that could be rolled into the performance measures we have, but definitely areas that the performance measures even don't track and we should have, maybe even a target for. That's, we have, I think, a list of those as well. And I think we will be coming to you with that. How are we addressing those gaps?
Great.
And that's just part of adaptively managing. I think the Delta plan overall is when this performance measure was originally adopted by the council, there was nothing else to measure about groundwater because no one was measuring groundwater, right? So the only thing to measure was the plans being put together under the new law. So yes, we are looking at what additional data streams will be available to inform our plan going forward.
It's definitely not a critique. It's more like just how are we adapting to what we learned, and I think everybody would be interested in sort of seeing that visually somehow. And I'm particularly always interested in seeing how the effect of animal agriculture is affecting not just the Delta, but water usage and greenhouse gas from the water that is being used for animal agriculture. And I don't know if that's something that we're currently looking at, but I know DWR had come and given us a presentation about water usage and how they were now able to track the amount of water that people were taking and what it was being used for. And I asked if they had a differentiation between water that was being used for animal agriculture versus water that's being used for agriculture where we're growing plants for human consumption. And they said that they didn't have it quite refined yet to that point. And I had suggested that they take a look at that, because I think that in the future, one of the things that future administrations may be looking at is where we really need to start looking at curtailing greenhouse gas emissions and effects to the ecosystem. And I think animal agriculture is kind of a big area there. It's a sensitive area in a lot of ways, but I think if it's something that we could, start weaving into how we track things and taking a look at what should we be looking at there to measure what's going on with it and its impact on the environment, on the Delta, on the amount of water that we're using. I think it'll be an important statistic for people to be able to look at. And maybe I want to learn a lot more about it myself, and I think the council would like to learn more about it too. So I'm kind of throwing that out there. Yes, Member Burgess.
Two things. The first one was when we were talking about Nutria, it showed the new map of where they've moved. And it's my understanding that because we'd had a lot of water right before that they'd kind of been pushed downstream. So those new maps might not necessarily indicate increases in the population, but maybe a movement of the nutrient. Is that correct? My understanding?
I don't have an answer to that. I'm not exactly sure if I haven't found anything that could say that it contributed to it, but I mean, it's possible they're semi-aquatic, just got pushed down. But yeah, we could get back to you on that.
Yeah, I'm just curious. And then the other part that Chair Lee was just talking about was water usage. When we're talking about groundwater, increasing our groundwater or restoration, that it's my understanding that sometimes that takes up a lot of water to use for that. And so I think it would be good to acknowledge or identify the additional water needed to do those things that, because I think as we talk about water supply, when we're working on these goals, we need to know how much water is needed to meet those goals. So those were my comments. Thank you.
No, those are good. And it reminded me of one other thing that I was thinking about was regarding our subsidence reversal and carbon sequestration goals. I'm not, can you remind me kind of how we set these goals in the first place? And do we feel like this target is aggressive enough, I guess, would be the question.
Yeah, so the target of 30,000 acres we got from a Delta Conservancy document. I can find exactly which one that is and send it if you're curious. I don't have the name off the top of my head, but that's where we developed that. And I think in terms of, is it aggressive enough? I think, yeah, given that we're going to be halfway within like a few years, I feel like that does tell us that like there's still a lot of room to go. But I do think it is exciting that like there was that 11,000 that was cleared recently. And I think if we wanted to be more aggressive, we could look at like the 2050 moving on from there and like maybe try to encourage more of like an exponential like slope of fighting that, because like subsidence isn't getting any better. And there was like, yeah, a few years where it was really wasn't progressing like in the way that we wanted it to.
I think one of the challenges is even if we doubled our targets, that doesn't necessarily lead to changes on the ground. So we're trying to look at how can we use our leadership and our oversight role at the council to encourage those types of projects and work with our partners. But I mean, we're also looking at, should we increase targets?
Yeah. And you had mentioned that DWR is doing the bulk of the work, it sounds like right now on this.
Yeah.
And possibly, did you say the Conservancy, are there other people that are actively working on the subsidence reversal?
So right now, like it's basically DWR was pretty much the sole entity up until like last year when the Delta Conservancy released funding for 3 projects that, yeah, I forget who's spearheading each of those, but I can get a list of that to you. But yeah, that is kind of exciting because that indicates like diversification of, at least it's not just DWR doing these projects anymore.
Are you talking about the web track
project? Yeah,
Okay.
web track, Bethel Island, and
Knightson?
That's the one, yeah.
So it's interesting because I've talked to the folks working on the web track, and they're very committed to the goals.
Mhm.
But what they're learning, because this is adaptive management and we're figuring these things out, is that the goals of meeting the subsidence and the restoration is not going to go as fast as they think it's going to. And that's because of, learning about the behavior of how water travels and how to, do all of that. So, we're learning as we go.
For sure, yeah. And I've heard from people from DWR that it's similar. Like I think for Whales Belly, one of their biggest projects on Sherman Island, it was completed in 2022 and they're only flooding it this year because of, maintenance.
And the goals related to even rice farming are challenging because it's on an island and farmers aren't used to doing that. So, but they're learning as they go with the goals that they've set, but it's not, it's not a recipe, you do this, this, and then you get that. It's adaptive management.
Yeah. I love Councilmember Zingali's idea about using our communications in a targeted way to highlight some of the challenges that we're having with the performance measures. And I think, we could kind of just put that out there for the executive and the comms team to, think about how we can push out, maybe like once a week, highlight one of our performance measures and, kind of make a little bit of a push there to get some of the specific ones that we have concerns about kind of to the forefront of things. I think it's great to push out the whole package of performance measures, but realistically, a lot of folks aren't going to really flip through and look at every single one. So if we kind of flag the ones that we really want to get in front of our audience, then I think that might be a great way to highlight the work that we're doing, and also to get people thinking about what other performance measures they'd like to see us tracking and get, kind of a public input into the process in some ways. Yeah, great. Does anyone else have? Thank you. Yeah, wonderful. All right, well, I'd like to thank the panel very much. Do we have any public comments on this item?
We do not have any in West Sacramento. Councilmember Zingali, do you have any at your location?
None in Eureka.
All right, there are no public comments on this item.
Great. As I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, we're not going to have a need to go into closed session during this council meeting. So we will skip right to preparation for our next council meeting. First, though, I'd like to thank the West Sacramento VFW for hosting us here today. And of course, our staff for having to set up and learn a new venue. So thank you guys for everything it takes to put together the meeting. Our next council meeting will take place on March 27th at the CNRA building in Sacramento. So please refer to the posted meeting notice for further information or updates. And with that, we are adjourned.
Chair Lee, we have a hand from Councilmember Zingali.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
That's okay. I'm sorry about that. I really just wanted to express gratitude to anybody who contributed to the active project list chart with the categories. It's super helpful. So thank you. We didn't talk about it today, but I just want to know it is noticed and appreciated.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. We're adjourned.